Jesse, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's a long time coming. Should have probably had you on the pod before we had a more formal reason to.
Pre-employee podcast guest.
Yes, but now Jesse, we're very excited to have as a senior director of SEO at Siege. Comes from a wealth of experience at IBM most recently, global SEO strategist, agencies before that, and well-respected speaker in our industry.
Thank you.
So great to have you here. And we're both in Austin, so figured why not take the excuse to talk some SEO news, right?
100%. I like it.
And turns out maybe we picked the exact right week to do it.
I think we did. I really think we did. There's been a lot going on this week. Last 2 weeks, actually. Very busy.
Yeah, I mean, we got it up here on the screen, and we'll screen share, but everyone's seen this, hopefully, that's listening to this so far, but hopefully we'll have a few unique comments on it. The Algo, or some variant of the Algo, depending on who you talk to, or details of the Algo, apparently has been leaked to Rand, who then Rand Fishkin, a well-respected former CEO of Moz, who now kind of distributed that to the very technical, super smart Mike King of iPool Rank, who kind of dug into it and pulled out a lot of the pertinent details. What would you add to that, Jesse, or what were some initial observations you had?
So this one's a big one. I think, especially coming off of how busy we've been the past few weeks with some of the big changes, this is crazy. You don't hear this happening that much. And I think since we talking about this, Google has even clarified, yes, this is an official leak. So, I mean, this is a real thing. It's kind of worked, and huge kudos to Mike for going through all of this. Calling him a technical guru is almost an understatement. That man is one of the most technically proficient humans I've ever met.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, looking through it, there's some really interesting things in here. It kind of does a little bit of myth busting, which I find incredibly interesting. One of the big things that I really thought was interesting here was that it seems that Google gives an overall score to websites. And we kind of had a feeling that that was the case, but seeing it in action in some capacity, even there's a lot of speculation that maybe these are just some AI calls for some other function within Google. But seeing this gives us an idea of what data they actually are pulling and have access to. So seeing that there's an overall score to a site is kind of a cool thing. There's always the argument of domain authority. And Mike even talks about this within the actual post itself, that domain authority as a blanket term and not necessarily the score within Moz, there's some validity there. So paying attention to that is definitely something that I think everyone should take away from this. I think another really interesting piece of the puzzle is how clicks are kind of impacting a site's rankings. Something that Rand has talked about for a really long time, and I think that was one of the key pieces of this article was, hey, everyone, Rand has mentioned this, and we all kind of shut him down.
Yeah.
And I think there's an argument there for, it's valuable. I think, me personally, I think it's more of a news or a timely piece sort of metric. I don't know if, Joe Plumber down the street's article getting clicked on more than the average guy would be an outweighing factor, but it could be. But I think one of the really cool things was that it denoted that the click has to have some sort of meaningful action towards it. Time on page, maybe it's moving through the site even further as opposed to just a click. So it's a little bit harder to game. That one, I think, really stood out for me personally. I know you had a couple that you kind of thought were interesting.
Yeah, no, I think all that is interesting for sure. Google originally came out and was talking about domain authority, or like it's not a thing. And I wonder if those are a lot of their previous statements. Maybe they outright lied sometimes, but were kind of just like semantic things. It was like, it probably isn't domain authority, but is it as defined in this document? Site authority, I believe, was the reference point. And maybe they're just, in general, they didn't like, just putting yourself empathetically in their shoes, maybe didn't want to influence click manipulation on their search results. So there's no like net benefit to be telling users to do that. Or that would be the assumption anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of the things that were interesting to me were some clear definitions of like font size seems to matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We were being even talking about this where sometimes in software sites, you'll have an H1 that technically is small, and you should probably define it still as an H1 just because it's the best place for that keyword anchor text. I think maybe what this says is and I believe they might have said it out loud, but put preference on larger text on average, or bolded text and things of that nature. And they also called out like a specification for small personal sites. It seems like the helpful content update or some of the recent updates obviously have been really destroying some smaller websites in a negative way. And seemingly they have a way to kind of pull out those details, which is not the best.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think some of my experience in the past, especially working with a gigantic global millions of pages website, I do know and have confirmed in a couple of places that whenever they're weighing out your rankings within the index itself, they do take your site into account. And sometimes those things that are weighed, like maybe links, if something big happens and they see that there's a shift in that can then turn into, well, maybe we don't weigh links so heavily like we did before, and then there's an adjustment. So maybe that could be a bit of what's going on here. Maybe there's just some weird adjusting that needs to be happening as they're kind of reclassifying some of those sites.
Yeah. I mean, not all of them are that great. I don't know what your personal opinion has been. I haven't had time to dig in deeply on it. We luckily have mid to large size clients, but a lot of the people you hear, you actually look at them, and it kind of goes back to that like click depth and staying on site and things. Like I would bounce and go to a CNET, even if the CNET article is generated by AI,
right?
Which they've done in the past because they've established some trust, right?
Yeah, totally.
So those things matter.
Yeah. I think one of the other really cool things that I took away from Mike's article was that Panda might not be as in real time as we thought it was. I know when it moved into the core algorithm and then Penguin a couple years later, which by the way was right when I started in SEO. So that was a really interesting time to really start learning this stuff. Seeing that it might not necessarily be more of a real-time thing, but just kind of has a weight, and then that's evaluated as time goes on. That was incredibly interesting to me because that's something that I considered maybe more on the Penguin side of things for how links were evaluated in the past. So yeah, I think maybe thinking of things as not necessarily so real time, that has an impact on how we test things and like test out content. So yeah, I think that's a key takeaway everyone should really look into. But I mean, overall, this article, even if you're not the most technically savvy person, sit with it and give it a read, because this could give you some ideas of things to try in the verticals that you're working in.
Yeah, another kind of like variant that I found interesting that Mike called out, and is just like they stated that authors are an explicit feature. He was pessimistic in the article, and I generally agree of that. Can you truly weight towards an author's name or history? But they're at least kind of like identifying that in their ranking factors. I don't think it went to enough depth to kind of say, and correct me if you saw differently, that they're truly weighing that, but at least via identifying it shows they could at least go that direction some way.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some preference. I'm not sure.
Yeah, same. I think for me, at the end of the day, this doesn't give us the secret sauce. We kind of keep working the same way that we've always worked. Just make good content, make websites that make sense and are logical. But at the same time, we know what they can look at. We know what they have the possibility of, so we know what to keep an eye out on. So I always say, take this, test things out, iterate on those tests, implement, and then repeat the process. Don't ever take anything as gold standard. Grain of salt, test it out for yourself. So it's kind of like the last thing that I thought was really interesting from this, and it's a conversation everyone's been having for years, but the validity of the disavow tool and getting rid of links. I've seen it work up to like 5 years ago when people were saying it didn't work. So I mean, it's been a second, but I mean, if they're saying it's going away in the future, maybe it doesn't work. And that's something that this kind of calls out a little bit. So I think, again, it's all about testing it.
Yeah, for sure. My feeling was not much changes, honestly.
No, my Tuesday was no different than my Wednesday.
Read up on some of the takeaways and how people, I mean, it's interesting. It's good to see some confirmation of previously held thoughts on these things. But maybe like this kind of document would have been more powerful 10 years ago when
Agreed.
you could more easily manipulate things. Today, the algorithm is complex enough that you're still not going to take the science and be able to beat IBM.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a really good learning tool and something to consider, but as long as you're doing things the right way, you should be able to stay the course.
Agreed.
Speaking of really interesting news over the last couple of weeks, and I know one that you're really excited about, let's talk about AI overviews.
I don't know if I'd say I'm excited, but
overstatement of the day.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm optimistic. I think I'm naturally optimistic. So take that with a grain of salt, as we keep saying that phrase. But the fact that what we saw in an initial data set, and just to like clarify some confusion our own study got, just to say it out loud for people who are listening to this who might not have seen it, we did an analysis of a sample size of 4 days pre and post rollout of AI overviews to understand, had our clients seen a significant impact from this? We, of course, could not measure at that scale which searchers had AI overviews, which did not, be able to dial down directly and see the change specific to AI overviews. So it's feasible that a small percentage of this was AI overviews and they actually saw a negative drop. But in my macro view, it matters more, are our businesses really impacted by this or not? And the good news is, at least in our client sample, it could have been some strong increases against some decline from AI overviews rolling out. We actually saw positive change. So that, to recap for people listening, essentially, in short, we saw a 4% increase in traffic. I think the more notable things truly that potentially could reference AI overviews, but I think it's still uncertain, is impression increase. One of the things that Google said is that hypothetically people are searching more because of these overviews based on like the next suggested questions and what have you. So that went up 1.9%, 6% in our sample of 67 million searches, or really 32 million searches across the 2 day ranges. And then the overall click-through rate increased by 3% as well. Again, this is just combining everything, but our kind of initial impression, which was mostly leaning towards SaaS as the industry, we actually are relatively balanced. We just skew a little SaaS in our client sample across fintech and e-com consumer verticals. That was even a more positive increase, which is interesting because those tend to be more like complex B2B queries on average that we have in our sample, as compared to maybe the consumer set is a little less so. And that was still positive, not quite as positive. Impression volume actually dropped a little bit, but that could be, again, the sample size was 34 million, 35 million across the 2 day ranges. But yeah, that's just our kind of look. Jesse, what was your kind of initial reaction?
I kind of feel the same way. I was a little worried going into it when they were about to announce it, because I mean, the way that kind of feature works, it could be hugely detrimental to a site and it's gaining traffic, which that's what we want. That's our bread and butter. So seeing that, at least for our sites, it's not making such a negative impact. It's kind of, we're staying the course. We're seeing a couple shifts here and there, but seeing that we can kind of keep maintaining and doing our thing is great. I'm not as bought into AI within search as other people are. I always joke, I use my mother as my litmus test. If she's not into it, I don't think it's going to get adopted as widely, and she is asking to turn it off. Okay. She is not a fan. So I mean, granted, there's an element there of bias, but yeah, I think it's not going to be the SEO killer that everyone thought it was going to be. Not everyone, but some people thought it was going to be. Hashtag SEO is not quite dead. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's good. I'm happy to see that, at least from our side of things, we're not having a huge impact. So that's great.
Yeah, it is worth presenting the opposite side of the coin, which I don't think Kevin Indig, well-respected growth marketer advisor, also did a study of a large sample set of keywords specific to overviews. Unlike us, we were looking at just the sample size across all traffic, and he was trying to understand what is the actual change when these results show up. And his 2 data points that pulled out of his sample was that when you're double-sided in a AI overview, you see a almost 9% decline in clicks. And then if you were not cited, you lost 2.8% traffic. Neither of those are still the end of the world, all things considered. And if we assume they're only showing up on a small percentage of searches, not traumatic, I would say. But
I agree.
The again, negative take that I've seen some people respond to our post and even thinking about this, it probably won't get worse than this, knock on wood, but the theoretically they're just getting started and obviously testing and learning. They could roll this out to more results.
Yeah.
Of course.
I'm kind of hoping they're in the what I call the spinal tap effect. They're cranking it to 11. They're going to just kind of dial it back a little bit as they kind of refine and get smarter with it. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I did see in their testing sample, it was like 60, I forget what the samples, I'm just going to be making up, but it was like 40% of queries. And then like right before launch in beta, it drops precipitously.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they pulled back to go live.
Oh, interesting.
So it's possible they would push back out, but I think many people listening to this probably saw the negative PR backlash, which was inevitable, I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Which kind of ties into the first thing. Some people are theorizing that the leak is to get some people off of talking about AI overviews. So
I saw that theory.
Tinfoil hat a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll have to ask Rand if the guy had like a masked voice.
Yeah. Give us your source, Rand.
But yeah. I mean, it was a lot of that criticism was coming outside of SEO, but
yeah.
But it's getting out. We're talking to people here that are aware of the Google leak. So it's not just isolated to our industry for sure.
Absolutely.
So one of our colleagues in the industry basically gave a new update or thought process on how Hreflang should be thought about and may potentially evolve in the future. What was that article and what were your takeaways from it?
Yeah. So recently at a conference, Gary Ish from Google kind of put a call out that said, hey, I know Hreflang is a pain. It's necessary evil, but if anyone has any ideas of how to improve it so that usability is there and we actually kind of create something a little more easy to digest so people do use it, I'm all ears. So of course, the great Bill Hunt, I'm a big fan of Bill, good friend. I've used him in previous companies to actually do Hreflang with his awesome tool. But he has put together kind of a collection of things that he has seen over the web of people's suggestions for Hreflang solutions and kind of what his thoughts are on them. So he gives a really good pros and cons list. So there's some really good things in here. I think some of them are really focused on a domain level, which I think would be the ultimate ideal sort of state, where you have maybe specified directories that certain languages or languages and country codes kind of sit within, and then homepage or, in your robots file, something like that, you denote what those are. So then Google can kind of pick it up and say, oh, that makes sense. This is the Spanish language version of this page, or this is the French version. This is the French France. This is the French Canada, that sort of thing. There's definitely cons there. That's not going to be right out of the gate the most logical thing to do because it's not specific. That's the key here. Hreflang needs to be specific. So when it doesn't have the opportunity to be, it gets a little weird.
What would an example be of that?
So let's say if you did do it at a domain level and you just said, this is where I house this language, it doesn't give the opportunity to go page by page for the alternatives so that they're not kind of competing against each other, which is really the key here. You're denoting an alternate page. If you only do it at a domain level, then you run into issues where there could be confusion from the crawler side of things. Maybe it puts, this page A and page B connected to each other in the wrong way, something like that. So that's kind of where I am seeing this potentially being an issue, but that would definitely be the dream in terms of ease. One thing that someone else brought up, so Aleta Solis mentioned the robots.txt classification, which I think would be awesome. Someone else brought up, what if we did it within GSC? So utilizing that tool to say this is a language alternative version. I think that's an awesome option. It's something that every SEO should be using anyway. So theoretically, you should have access to it whenever you have a site. It should be there. So why not utilize it for this as an alternative? It does have some of the similar kind of cons that Bill has listed out for the previous two things we mentioned, but it's a possibility. So I think it's exciting that we're thinking about these types of things. And even at a Google level, we're saying, how can we make things better? Which always a fan of.
Do you feel these options would be superior to the current? Like I see the listed cons, but are they basically like they just won't work even though they almost seem good?
I think if we pretended like the cons weren't there, I think we'll use IBM and my past experience there as the example. That site is so big that having a scalable solution that's easy to implement would make things a lot easier, because we are, multiple countries, multiple languages, even within those countries. So doing something like this, where we can classify it in a designated place and not necessarily at a page level, would make things absolutely easier. But then you have to be realistic and bring the cons into play, and then it all just starts to dissolve, and it's not as easy. I think the one thing, one that was mentioned in here is the DNS records. I think that could be really cool, but from a execution perspective, getting, let's say from us, we work with clients. We're not working with the sites specifically from an ownership perspective.
Yeah.
Getting access to a DNS file or a DNS record within like a registrar would be near impossible. So the logistics of that one are that one's the one that red flagged me the most. I was like, oh, please, let's not do this one.
So is this as someone who I know you're bringing a wealth of international SEO experience to us, which I'm excited about. As someone who hasn't followed this as deeply, is this just a loud thing within the international SEO community, or people? I know Alita is doing a ton of this. You did a ton of this. Is this an ongoing conversation with Google, or are we kind of like having this over in a corner?
I think, especially with Gary's involvement, I think this is a loud conversation that's happening.
Okay.
It's a designated pain point, especially for just general utilization. It's not uncommon to find a site that has an international component, a globalized, even localized element, but they're not using Hreflang, or they're not using it correctly because it is so finicky and kind of sensitive, because it has its own standards of semantics. So having something where you don't necessarily need to be a super proficient technical SEO kind of person, and you kind of just are webmastering on your own, this could really help out the web as a whole. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate Bill putting that together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems like a positive step forward. Hopefully something good.
I think when the man that helped create Hreflang initially is starting to look for things and is hopeful for some alternatives, we've got a good sign.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, what do you got here? I know there's some crackdown on Parasite SEO.
Yeah, it's been maybe a little while. It's beginning of May where sites were really starting to get hit. But for those not following, just to recap, it became prolific that a lot of news publishers were essentially putting some kind of like personal finance, most commonly subfolder, living off that site authority theme of our first topic to capitalize on that and rank for a ton of things. The most obvious versions of this are Forbes Advisor, which everyone generally knows of. CNN had a coupon subdomain, I believe. An actual good version of this was the New York Times still has Wirecutter on a subfolder and actually does a good job of it. But the kind of problem was 98% of the examples of this were these publishers putting some kind of experience on their domain, but it didn't feel anything like CNN. It didn't feel like Forbes, or maybe it felt like Forbes because they're not the best. And they just essentially parasited off that site authority to rank, and everyone identified that, realizes the content quality was actually not very good, and pressured Google to do something, and then they did. So most notably, it seemed like coupon subdomains, and I believe it was casino subfolder subdomains were getting hit across several of these publishers to date. You called out, I'll let you describe. What did Danny say about this action?
Yeah, so currently, let's see, May 23rd, Danny Sullivan, the Google search liaison, mentioned on Twitter that at the time, there have been no actual manual or algorithmic actions, actually, that have gone out for this type of abuse. So it's still kind of in play, even though the update has gone out, which being at PubCon when that update was rolling out was really interesting. The gang was very much in an uproar trying to get it looked at and theorized. So yeah, seeing that they haven't taken any action necessarily yet is really interesting, and even seeing them confirming so, even more so interesting.
Well, I guess you're saying it's not manual actions, or I guess that's what he's saying here. Because clearly sites got.
And then see, that's kind of the back and forth that's happening right now. I know that they were saying that it would be more of a manual action that came through, from my understanding. Here he's saying that it's algorithmic. So who knows if it's this specific parasite element of it, or if those sites just also happen to fall into that kind of helpful content issue. So yeah, I think there's still a lot of speculation going on. Definitely highly recommend people checking out the Twitter thread from that specifically, because there's some folks raising their hand going, "Are you sure, Danny? Because I've seen some stuff." So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense if you look at the trend of what they did impact. I mean, you could technically solve for this is a news site plus coupons are representative. And it was interesting that I don't think they've yet hit every very clear example of parasiting off. It's almost those two industries in particular.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they just found less confidence in those areas, or they just felt more universally, this is no one.
Yeah.
No news site should be ranking for coupons.
Yeah, it's very possible.
So, I mean, my theory with seeing this, and I pull up Wirecutter, maybe it's actually not the best example, even though they pull it off. It's very clearly a high quality review experience. And that's not why New York Times originally bought them. I don't think. Maybe they did, to kind of fold it into the main site. But the thought process is so many of these sites, and I haven't checked in on Forbes Advisor, so we'll just look at it quickly and maybe it will have changed. It has not changed. The site experiences are always independent of the news publishing experience. I think if they truly were proud of these experiences, felt they were connective and not a parasite to the main experience, they would have a shared nav. It would feel similarly from a design standpoint. Obviously, the publishing expectations would be the same as well. Like that same managing editor of the main site would do that. And unfortunately, a lot of these sites will actually have unique publishing operations running them. And that just speaks to the independence and often disconnected editorial quality. It doesn't mean they're poor on the face of it. It's just like relative levels of quality standards. Like obviously the New York Times is amazingly high, CNN generally high, depending on who you talk to. But what they put out on a coupon subfolder or subdomain in their instance was not representative of actually what made them a DR domain authority, site authority 98, 99 that they are.
Yeah.
Right.
I think another interesting piece to talk about from Danny's tweet is that he did actually clarify that this penalty devaluation, whatever you want to call it, when it does roll out, is at a page level, not a site level. So I think those sites that do have this on a subdomain, that's a smart call.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'd think it's like almost, I know, I'm guessing at least some of these players at least paused investment or froze. I mean, honestly, transparently, in a few situations, we had a potential client or two reach out that was this method, and we kind of we got that notification. We're like, you guys maybe should like consider whether or not this makes sense. And we didn't move forward in that moment, and which felt like the most sustainable thing to do.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see how I guess what I was getting at there is if you don't have a reason to be hurt, once you if you're all you're going to do is turn off your ability to go over 60 miles an hour, you're not going to get thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just keep going through until you get caught?
Right.
It makes sense?
It's almost like, why not penalize the whole thing to stop them, or else we're
Yeah,
just going to see
yeah.
a big migration to subdomains.
I mean, I get it. They would look bad if they didn't have CNN didn't exist on the web.
Yeah.
But there should be a little, I don't know exactly what that would be, of course. But in many instances, none of these companies are going to be excited regardless that they poured a good amount of money into these efforts.
Yeah.
And they went away, right?
Yeah.
So awesome, Jesse. Yeah, I think this was a very action-packed set of news. I don't think every time will be this, but
hopefully the industry's not getting shaken up this hard all the time.
I mean, it's been an evolving year, obviously.
Yeah.
Set of years with AI, and that's probably not slowing down. Although I think, the whole industry was, at least personally, I was pointing at that overviews thing in macroeconomically and just how I think a lot of people were making decisions behind it. So we'll see, hopefully, when that shakes out and people realize the world is not falling or the sky is not falling, SEO is still going to be the strong industry it has been.
Yeah, I completely agree. If people are searching, we're going to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, so I appreciate people listening to this. First kind of like news take on it. So if you have feedback for us, please drop them in the comments. Let us know. But we'll see you next time, and thanks for listening.